Blizzard has been doing a really good job of keeping the details of patch 10.2.6 a secret, until yesterday. They haven't put this patch on the PTR, so there hasn't been any data mining or news. We don't know what's in it, we don't know when it's coming, we don't know anything at all, just like in life generally. But we do know that it's supposed to happen sometime in March, and yesterday Blizzard dropped 2 big clues that indicate it's probably coming out on the next weekly reset. Hi, it's Llarold, and you already know what I'm talking about in this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe though. Let's just get right into it. Let's start with the first clue. Blizzard announced an 8-hour maintenance with the coming reset. This is extremely unusual for a random Tuesday in the middle of a patch, but for a patch week, an 8-hour maintenance is really normal. So I went to my spreadsheet on patch cadence throughout the expansion, and would you believe it, I predicted this patch would come out on March 12th, before we even knew it would be called patch 10.2.6, back when I thought it was patch 10.2.7. I feel very smart right now. Now, technically speaking, I missed on 10.2.5 by a week. I thought it would be January 9th. Turned out to be January 16th, which makes sense with that being the end of the year, that whole holiday time. That would put this patch going from January 16th to March 12th. That would be right at 8 weeks, which has been the standard patch cadence for this expansion. So I think that all feels pretty good. Now, I could be proven wrong and dumb in a couple of days, but I don't think so, and that's because of reason number 2, a huge swath of class tuning changes that are also coming with the weekly reset. Once again, these could be part of a random weekly reset class tuning pass, but there's a bit too much here for it to only be that. It's all too much. Looking at both the class changes and the extra long maintenance, I think you can only draw one conclusion. Patch coming. Patch coming now. So while we're here, let's take a look at these class tuning changes. We'll start with Resto Druid. They're getting a 12% increase to their rejuvenation healing. I've taken some time to look at some logs. This seems like almost a nil change in Mythic Plus, at least for high level Mythic Plus Resto Druids. They really don't use rejuve much at all, but in raid this is actually pretty substantial. It's like their main source of healing, so pretty good for raiding Resto Druids. Maybe for like mid or lower level Mythic Plus Resto Druids, not a big deal for the competitive high end of Mythic Plus. Preservation Evoker is the one that really stands out as being like pretty meaty here, and there is even a special developer note here. Preservation has been underutilized lately. This is true, in part due to the range restrictions of the specialization. Also true. To help compensate for that, we're increasing the healing and defensiveness of Preservation so they can traverse the battlefield more easily and safely? This is like going to the doctor with a giant hole in your head and them saying like, oh, I see you have a giant hole in your head. Let me put a bandage on your finger. That should fix it. Obviously, this isn't a fix. The problem is Preservation just needs more range, less positional requirements on their heals. That's really not something they want to do in a hotfix patch, and I don't blame them for wanting to wait for a major patch or really just the next expansion to fix that issue, but this feels like a non-fix to a glaring problem. I think their reasoning here, if I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and be sympathetic, is if they were to massively buff the healing of the class, you know, we're talking like just 50% more healing or something, it would then become good just on that strength alone. And then they would have to nerf it back down once they fix the real underlying problem, which is the terrible range and positioning requirements on Preservation. So doing a very small buff pass like this, I guess makes sense, but it doesn't seem great. I don't think it's going to change anything for Preservation Evokers. So let's actually look at the changes. Time of Need clones overall healing doubled. Time of Need clones Living Flame healing increased by 16% on top of that. So I have a Preservation talent setup looked at here, pulled up here. Time of Need is a very strange talent. It is passive. It has a 2-minute cooldown, but also says it can only occur once every 60 seconds, so doesn't seem very finalized to me. And it just basically works like this. When you or an ally fall below 20% health, a version of yourself enters from an alternate timeline and heals them for a lot of damage, a lot of healing, whatever. Your alternate self continues healing them for 8 seconds before returning to their timeline. So it's sort of a reactive heal that can proc on yourself or an ally. That's a cool concept. It's just not a good talent because it kind of suffers from all of the same problems that pet talents like Storm, Earth, and Fire for Windwalker monks do. If allies walk out of range of the heals, it'll just stop healing them. I talked with one of my guild's healers recently about this, and he said that if you have over, I think it's about 23 or 24% haste, it just literally won't heal at all. Well, that I mean, if you have Bloodlust or Fury of the Aspects or whatever equivalent Time Warp active, you're going to have over 30% haste just from that alone. So during a Bloodlust or whatever, it just won't trigger. It's just not a great design. Definitely a problem, and I don't think that doubling the healing on something that doesn't work is going to make it be good. So I don't think this fixes anything for that. Lifegiver's Flame has been changed to heal for 80% of damage dealt instead of 70%. That is this talent right here in the middle of the tree, which makes it so that your Fire Breath heals nearby injured allies for a percentage of the damage it deals, splits it evenly. It's kind of a smart heal, sort of. It's not a huge source of your healing. Again, I've gone through some logs, seen that it's maybe like 5 to 10% of people's healing overall, maybe 15% even on some logs. That's maybe a couple percent of total healing. So you have like 0 healing increase from Time of Need, a couple percent from Lifegiver's Flame, and then you have buffs to Inherent Resistance and Attuned to the Dream. Now, Inherent Resistance is just a class talent. It is this talent right here. Inherent Resistance gives you 4% magic damage reduction. That's being doubled up to 8%. So this is 4% more magic damage reduction for Preservation Evoker. This is a very easy talent to take. You're always going to want this. It's okay. It's basically a couple points of verse. Not going to say no to it, but I don't think it's going to change it's not going to be a difference maker, right? And then the same goes with Attuned to the Dream. Attuned to the Dream is this talent on the right-hand side right here. Your healing done and received is increased instead of by 4% by 6. Again, this is like a couple percent worth of healing, a couple percent worth of damage reduction on a class that is far and away the least popular in the entire healing ecosystem. So if we look at healer popularity in Mythic Plus on Archon, all of the healers other than Holy Paladin are in the double digits. If we look at that in Raid as well, all of the healers are in the double digits at least. It's actually pretty well balanced for Resto Druid all the way through Holy Priest. It's somewhere between 10 and 20% popularity. That's pretty good. Then you have Preservation Evoker down here at 6.7% in Raid. It is substantially lagging behind. It's half as popular as the next least popular spec. That's not great. If we compare Mythic Plus, again, it's a pretty similar breakdown where Mistweaver Monk is obviously dominant. They're making up a quarter of all healers, but that's still relatively balanced when you compare it to like tanks. Holy Paladin is sort of an underperformer, 7.5%, but again, they're more than twice as popular as Preservation Evoker, which is just the real orphan spec among healers in terms of popularity in Mythic Plus and Raid alike. There isn't a place where they excel. Unfortunately, these buffs really aren't going to move the needle for them. They're going to need a wholesale rework. They're going to need really just a fundamental change on the way that they function. I want them to work well. I like Evoker as a class. I think the concept is really cool, but the current range limitations of the class really don't work for Devastation or Preservation, and I think that's been pretty well demonstrated throughout the whole expansion. Now let's move on to some DPS specs. Marksmanship Hunter, Survival Hunter, and Elemental Shaman all got 3% damage increases. We can look at their popularity in Mythic Plus, and I think popularity is probably a better metric to sort by than just straight damage. We can look at that as well, but as we see, like Survival Hunter, bottom 10, Marksmanship Hunter, bottom 10, and Elemental Shaman slightly outside of that bottom 10, but still in the lower third of popularity. Now, if we sort by DPS, okay, yeah, Marksmanship, Survival, Elemental, all in the bottom third. If we look at Raid numbers, I think that's maybe a little bit more telling here. If we look at their popularity, their usage rate in Raid, we can see Marksmanship and Survival Hunter are in the bottom 3. Elemental Shaman is number 6 at the bottom there. If we look at their DPS numbers, again, pretty similarly, Survival Hunters really scrape at the bottom of the barrel, Marksmanship Hunters down there as well, and Elemental Shaman is pretty close. Frostmage is also down there, languishing at the bottom of the pile, and as we can see by looking here, Frostmage has gotten some buffs. These look like a lot. Flurry damage getting a 25% buff, Waterbolt and Water Jet damage getting a 25% buff, Frostbolt. Frostmage has cast Frostbolt, 10% more damage on that. That's got to be good, right? Ice Lance, 5% more damage there. I know they love Ice Lance. So I spent some time looking at some logs, and actually this seems like it's basically just a more flavorful version of doing a 3% damage buff. Flurry only makes up about 3 to 5% of your total damage, both in Raid and Mythic Plus. Waterbolt and Water Jet are your pet spells, your stupid water elemental spells. They do almost nothing. Frostbolt actually is a very small amount of your damage as a Frost Mage. Pretty much all of it comes from Glacial Spike. That's like 40% of your damage, and then maybe half that, maybe less, is Ice Lance. So all told, these buffs really are just basically the same as the 3% damage buff for Marksmanship, Survival, and Elemental Shaman. A little bit of a bummer there. Subtlety got a 6% eviscerate damage reduction, and it's interesting that they only nerfed the one skill. If we look at their damage in Raid, and obviously this isn't indicative, this isn't completely a rule to follow, but as we can see, they are significantly ahead of second place. We kind of see, like, if we look at the overall damage number, which is adding all the fights together, we can see like somewhere in the 260k range is like a pretty good amount of damage that an average good DPS spec is dealing. And then Subtlety Rogue is just substantially ahead of that. You know, like if we just do a very basic math calc out here, right? They're like 4 to 5% ahead of the rest of the pack. So nerfing Eviscerate, they're like sort of bread and butter combo point finisher. Taking that damage down slightly will probably bring them a little bit closer to the rest of the pack, make them not be quite such a huge outlier in terms of their ability to deal damage in Raid. Now in Mythic Plus, they're not really as strong of a spec. Outlaw tends to be the spec of choice for rogues anyway, so I don't think it's a huge deal if they see a little bit of a nerf in Mythic Plus. I don't think that nerfing their Eviscerate damage is actually going to wind up really hamstringing them in Mythic Plus anyways, but certainly it'll bring them back into line in Raid. Now Mistweaver is the real big one, the real big outlier, and I kind of want to look at both their healing in Mythic Plus and in Raid just to kind of demonstrate that. Now their usage rate in Mythic Plus, insanely high for healers. 25%, pretty great. They're obviously well ahead of the pack in Mythic Plus as well. I did the Mistweaver challenge recently. I don't like the healer challenge, the healer mage tower challenge, not a fan at all, but it was surprisingly easy. I found Mistweaver Monk to be, like, even as a novice, extremely overpowered. And obviously just doing the most basic of calculator, you know, put a couple of numbers in and divide, they're over 10% ahead of the competition in terms of healing in Mythic Plus, while also being able to deal a very competitive amount of damage. So it makes sense that they would get some nerfs here. In Raid, similarly, they're kind of right in the same boat. They are about, I think, around 6% ahead, if I am eyeballing that right. Yeah, about 6% ahead of number 2. They don't deal nearly as much damage in Raid as the Discipline Priest for mechanical reasons, but they're able to do so much healing, and it's kind of been a thing that people have been expecting for a while, that Mistweaver Monk would eventually get nerfed. I think my expectation was that the Mistweaver Monk nerf and some Farak nerfs would occur at the same time, because people are relying on Mistweaver Monk to be able to kill Farak. There are still people progging it, and to nerf the class while they're still working on a pretty hard fight, that would be kind of unfair, kind of brutal. So I think holding off on that until nerfing him kind of makes sense to me. Maybe he'll get an indirect nerf by some mechanics that are added in the patch that we have no idea about. So a 6% overall healing nerf, but then they are buffing Shailen's Gift, which is kind of a burst heal, Jadefire Stomp, the beautiful Phaline Stomp from the Night Fae that's now been given a nice recolor and a rename. It's getting a damage and healing increase to make it still be an effective, you know, exactly as much healing as it was before. And then Expel Harm so that you aren't losing self-healing in the course of getting, you know, getting your overpowered healing made slightly less overpowered, but still, frankly, best in slot, best in the business. I think overall my takeaway on all of these changes is that they are once again kind of surprisingly conservative. I guess you shouldn't be surprised by this point. Almost 20 years of playing World of Warcraft, I shouldn't be surprised that they're doing a conservative approach when it comes to class tuning, but it is kind of shocking that they're just sort of leaving some of these orphan specs, some of these underperformers, things like Devastation Evoker or Frosty K, or I mean Affliction Lock. That's really the one that stands out to me. Why is Affliction Lock not getting any love here? I don't know. So that really stood out to me. Now, there are also a lot of PvP changes coming in this patch, like a lot of them, and that's fine. I really haven't kept up with PvP all that much, so I don't have any strong opinions about it, but I do sort of think this indicates that this probably is a patch day set of changes. Now, I could be wrong. I hope not. If I am right, then this is pretty exciting. I'm certainly hoping that this will be the patch. I really want to see all the new stuff that they say they have planned. It seems interesting and exciting, and I want to see if this experiment of keeping us all in the dark and then just letting us go out and discover the new stuff as it is released, I want to see how that works out. I think it could be pretty fun, and I'm very hopeful for this upcoming patch. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.